The cleanest way I can describe what I learned is for 30 years I was a food critic. And I would go out to these nice restaurants and eat these nice meals and complain about how the steak was positioned on the plate. And then I took a job in the kitchen. It's chaos back in the kitchen. In the end, what I learned was how to wrap the story around the fact that there's chaos. And I didn't understand that that's what the people I was working with as an analyst did for a living. This is blasphemy. This will cause me hate mail. But what the hell do you need recruiters for in the first place? This is a job of the first level supervisor. If you're an LLM company, this is the best marketing I've ever heard. Here's the marketing pitch. If you don't learn about AI, you're going to be out of work for the rest of your life. Give me $20. Silicon Valley thrives on FUD. And this is like the best, simplest FUD that I have ever seen.
Welcome back to the Meg and Amy Show. Thank you so much for the support for our show. Please do like and subscribe and add comments. We would love to hear from you and what you'd like to see more of on the show. Today we are interviewing John Sumser. John is the HR technology industry's leading independent analyst. For over 2 decades, he's been the most credible voice on HR tech through HR Examiner, a senior fellow at the Conference Board, and a former board director at Salary.com. But what made the past few years different? John stepped off the sidelines and into operations, serving as VP of Marketing at Salary.com, going from analyzing AI adoption to actually having to use it. Today, we're talking about what changes when you move from observer to operator, how to navigate career reinvention, something John's done multiple times, from defense engineer to whole earth catalog editor to analyst and then operator and back to analyst, and why he believes we're further from AI transformation than the hype suggests. But the career disruption is very real. Welcome, John.
Hey, I am so glad to be here. How are you guys?
We are delighted to have you.
Yeah, this is an exciting time. We're coming towards the end of the year, and we're getting a chance to get people on like yourself that we've been thinking about for quite some time. So thank you for finally making this work for us. It's good.
Oh, I'm excited. I am so impressed by what you guys are doing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Checks in the mail.
Yeah.
Oh, so you want to become an analyst?
Oh, we're going right there.
Exactly.
May as well get started.
All right, John. Well, before we jump into the meat of it, I like to ask an icebreaker. And I learned some things about you when I was reading up. And specifically, your bio mentions that early in your career, one of your job options, and maybe jobs, was being a door-to-door Santa. We need to hear this story.
So I love this story because it actually encapsulates everything that I've done from the moment that I started with this stuff. So I was running retail camera stores, which in those days meant teaching people trigonometry so that they could learn how to use a single reflex camera, because there was nothing automated about photography in the late 70s. And so that put me in the position to get to know the Polaroid people. And Polaroid had this amazing technology. You took a movie, you could get several minutes of movie, and then you take the cartridge out and you stick it in the reader and it develops itself. And so it was an instant movie. And that product was called Polavision. And Polavision was it was the beginning of the end for Polaroid. They spent every bit of capital they had developing this genius bit of technology. And when they took it to market, the deal was if you bought a system, Santa would come to your house for a 4-hour party. And so me and 5 other Santas sat in this room waiting for the phone to ring that Christmas season, and we would show up in our costumes, because when you got the call you had to go, and the phone never rang, right? And the phone never rang because Betamax, that at the exact same time, all of a sudden came this similarly priced technology that would give you an entire hour, didn't have any of the hassles of self-developing, and you could edit it. And so Polaroid failed, and Polaroid failed for something that I have seen over and over and over again, which is people taking new technology and solving old problems without understanding what the new technology can do. And that is kind of exactly where we are today. I've seen that same thing happen again and again and again and again, which is people spend a great deal of money trying to institutionalize the last generation's idea of how things are supposed to work. And that seems to me that we have an epidemic of that today. I tend to think that what we're seeing in the marketplace isn't AI so much as it is a recession, and that a lot of the things that are identified as symptoms of AI being in the marketplace are actually the things that you could reliably use to tell if you were in a recession before.
I want to pick up on this point because I think the idea of people that have never experienced recession, people that have never run businesses where interest rates or cost of capital was something that was top of mind, people that have built businesses without having to think about all of the building blocks that were required to build their business. So we've had this period of time where there's been a lot held constant or improving. And so we've built a lot of proficiency in assembling these different knowns to create value and to build businesses. And all of a sudden, most of those foundational elements are shifting. And now you have cost basis that's very unreliable. Is, if you're building a business on top of an AI foundation model, you don't really have great line of sight of what that's going to look like a year from now, 2 years from now. You're using a lot of energy, and at some point that is going to become a throttle for how much AI you can use, because there may not be capacity to serve all of the different use cases. Every part of the businesses are adapting, and you don't have a lot of knowns to navigate, whether it is building a business, whether it is building a career, whether it is, just figuring out what is the world going to look like. So I'm just curious, those of us that have lived through some of these things, what are some of the things that we lean on to maybe help us?
I think it's a great question. And what I was thinking about as you were talking about this is in the 80s, right? One of the great things about my career is in the early days in the defense industry, I was the fastest rising guy in this huge corporation and got 15-20% raises every year. And 15 to 20% raises every year put you 5 points ahead of inflation. But the mortgage interest rates were in the mid-teens. The idea of full employment sat at around 6% unemployment. There are all these things that today people don't think are true. There had been great economic success throughout the Vietnam War, and then it fell apart.
Right.
And it really fell apart, and it was really, really hard, and nobody had good tools. Nobody had good tools. You got into it on a wing and a prayer, and tried not to look too hard at what was actually happening because it was impenetrable, right? And so I think the tool that matters is comfort with uncertainty, right? And I don't think you can put it on a spreadsheet, and I don't think you can turn it into software, but you can either see uncertainty as extraordinary risk, or you can see it as extraordinary opportunity, and you have to sort of decide to go after the extraordinary opportunity part of it. And then all sorts of magic can happen. because...
And so how did that manifest itself for you, John? Like how did that show through, and what did you come up against, and how did you deal with it?
Well, so I was always a horrible student. I was just a horrible student, and had a philosophy degree. So when I went into engineering inside of defense, I had to be willing to learn, and I had to be willing to take anything that was put in my way. So I started with learning how to code in those days, because everybody was sure that computers were going to be the end of work as we knew it. The country was full of vocational schools where you could go learn to code. And I learned to code with punch cards and IBM big machines. I got out, came into defense, and there were a lot of jobs that nobody wanted. And so I had a bunch of jobs that nobody wanted. And it meant that I learned how to do naval architecture, and I learned how to do battle tank construction, and I learned how to do high volume, high manpower technical publications work, and I learned how to do R&D in and around MIT. It was just because nobody else wanted it. It was insecure. The assignments there was definitely no upward mobility in these assignments. They were just the next turd in the punch bowl. I loved doing it, and I got away with doing it because nobody else would. And that's the kind of opportunity that comes up when things get uncertain.
So, John, I'm hearing a little bit of a paradox here. You said you were a terrible student, but you were a great learner. So how does that work?
To go to school, you have to learn how to switch your attention. And to be good at school, you have to be able to switch your attention all the time. I don't have that. What I like to do is really go deep and really learn something in its entirety, and that doesn't really always adhere to schedules very well, and it certainly doesn't adhere to going from biology to history to some other that kind of rapid switching. I'm just terrible at that kind of rapid switching, but I am really good at going deep.
I think I'm hearing another thing too. I think I'm hearing you also really like learning in service of an application, in like knowing that you're learning something to either do something new or, understand what you're doing better, et cetera, versus learning in abstraction because somebody else has this list of things they want you to learn.
You hit it right on the nose. I love that kind of building, whole cloth, magic.
Else you said that I thought was really interesting that I reflect back. I have heard Safra Katz say something somewhat similar in obviously a very different context, but that you stepped into roles nobody else wanted to do.
Right.
And in Safra's context, she came out to be focused on tech in financial services, and nobody wanted to be part of tech in financial services because it was seen as, sort of trivial and uninteresting at the time. Right. And then, of course, grew up around her as something that needed expertise and turned into, a fruitful market.
Yep.
I think that there is something really powerful in that, tied to the other thing that you said, which is being willing to step into roles and opportunities that maybe do not have great career paths, but that collectively can help give you more tools to go after something bigger at a future moment. How would you advise both like new early talent in thinking like this, and also maybe more experienced senior people who are finding themselves struggling to find jobs because the market is so difficult right now?
Well, I think the first thing that I would say is moving up is a very limited way to think about work, right? And so if you come into work and you think that success involves titles and hierarchy, the odds are you're going to be disappointed. The odds are you're going to be very disappointed because that's a thin path up, and every step up you make, the air gets rarer and rarer and rarer. But if you don't care about that and you say, what can I learn next? I've been thinking about, as we've been talking, one day the guy who was currently my boss walked into my office and said, we need you to run a program to teach kids from the Taiwan Naval Academy how to build a ship. That was such an interesting year. I spent the entire year with the premise being, if I was a little bit ahead of the class by the end of the day, then I could go home and get ahead of them again. And so I just stayed running ahead of them for the year or so of that particular contract. That was enough so that the people around me could come in and do some more programmatic stuff. They could see where the pieces were and what all the stuff was. So it's like being the explorer that cuts the path through the woods so that somebody can come along and do it. Because there were 10,000 engineers in that shop, and none of those 10,000 engineers had the slightest idea about naval architecture.
So your career has been a model of adaptability, and the two things I took away from what you said is have comfort with uncertainty and do what other people don't want to do. Now we're going to shift gears and talk about your latest career reinvention, which was you were an analyst for decades. And then you switched from being an analyst to being an operator, running marketing at salary.com. What did you unlearn? What did you learn? What surprised you about being on the inside?
So the cleanest way I can describe what I learned is, for 30 years I was a food critic, and I would go out to these nice restaurants and eat these nice meals and complain about how the steak was positioned on the plate or whether or not there were enough capers. It all came out of the kitchen and it was all pretty, and people fussed and wanted me to see the beauty that they'd created there. And then I took a job in the kitchen. And kitchens are places where you have to be alert a lot of the time. There's always this gremlin in the background who's eating up the routine and turning it into something else. And so it's never pretty, and it's never
there's a lot of
nicely
knives.
Structured. There's a lot of knives. yes, there are a lot of knives. There are all sorts of things that you just wouldn't. From the food critic perspective, you'd never guess that that's what's really going on. That in order to get the plate out of the kitchen and onto the table, people get cut and get blisters and burn themselves and bump into each other and knock stuff on the ground. You know, it's chaos back in the kitchen. It's organized, relatively organized chaos, but it's chaos nonetheless. Because all it takes is one big order, and the entire kitchen falls apart. In the end, what I learned was how to wrap the story around the fact that there's chaos. And I didn't understand that that's what the people I was working with as an analyst did for a living, is that they stood in the middle of the chaos and imagined it as a smooth story with plot points in it and that sort of stuff. And it's really fun to do. But you have to have been in the kitchen a while to be able to do it well.
And it also, I think, is, it takes a different thing out of you because of that, the pace and the, sort of emotional turmoil that's happening around you all the time based on whatever the thing is that's going on. Like, how did you imagine that was going to be as a work experience for you versus what did you learn after being in there for a while?
All I knew for sure is that it was going to be really different. It obeyed the same sort of principles that all of my moves around my career have made, which is you get there and you're stupid. and your initial traction comes from how willing you are to admit that you don't know what you're doing, right? And so part of what I did in the very beginning was I made a point of teaching everybody in the marketing team how to say I don't know. I don't know is like the most powerful thing that you can say, because that gives you a path out. If you say I don't know, then you can go figure out how to know. And if you say, oh, I got this, that is like the best recipe for screwing something up. Assuming that you know what you're doing is, I think a lot of people want that. A lot of people want to feel like they don't have to deal with imposter syndrome on a routine basis. But I think that the sense that you know what you're doing makes it really hard to improvise. Makes it really, really hard to improvise. And most of the interesting stuff happens in improvisation.
So you were suddenly leading a team for the first time in a long time. How was that?
Yeah. Oh, man. Here's what I learned. I learned I'm really not a very good leader of people. I am really good in small settings, one-on-one, one-on-two, at the core of things, but I am terrible with a team. I don't like the hard conversations. And then the other thing that I don't like is back-to-back meetings. I did all of this in the context of COVID, and what happened in COVID is we moved from working together to having 8-hour-long meetings in a row. Yeah. By the end of 8 sequential meetings, there was nothing left of my brain.
The context switching is a real energy drain, and especially for you, it sounds like.
Yep. And so the other thing about hierarchy is I'm not really good at that. I loved everybody that I met at Salary.com. I made some lifelong friends. It's been a tremendous experience. But part of the result of the experience is I learned some things that I'm now very clear. I have no interest in doing that again. Just like I have no interest in doing naval architecture again or interactive video disc design again. All these things that I've done, I like doing them to the point that I understand what they are and can cut out a path for somebody else, but then I like to move on to the next thing.
So you've now switched back to being an analyst. And so based on your experience on the inside, how will you approach being an analyst? How has your perspective changed? How's your approach going to change or is changing as a result of what you learned there?
Well, I have a better understanding of what people need. I have a much better understanding of what people need. It was all hypothetical to me when I was an analyst, and I think that disconnect between knowing what people need and being the person delivering it is responsible for the challenging things that the analyst industry offers, right? Because it's hard to make a living as an analyst telling truth to power. It's a lot easier to make a living as an analyst telling people what they want to hear. And so where I think I have an edge is I know what people need now, and my total challenge is going to be figuring out how to tell people what they need to hear in a way that allows them to harness that for commercial progress of some kind. And I would not have been any good at that. I wasn't any good at that for all of those years. And now I think it's going to be a lot better for traction.
Because you tended toward the saying what people wanted to hear side?
No. So a great example, 2015, I started building AI ethics advisory boards for big companies. And nobody was doing that. Absolutely nobody was doing that. And what I found is that there were few people who wanted to do that. And almost everybody else thought it was a complete waste of time. We learned a lot about how ethics worked in the 5 years between 2016 and 2020, but it wasn't because everybody wanted it. It was because I really needed to understand that. I have been blessed with the gift of being able to see about 5 years out pretty clearly. And so I can take people on that trajectory to 5 years out, but it's almost always, you got to trust the Sherpa. And you don't start a business because you want to trust a Sherpa. You start a business because you think you know what you're doing. That means that the people who are open to hard conversations about fundamental things it's just a small world.
So tell us a little bit about the reignition of the HR Examiner.
So I started the HR Examiner in 2007 or 2008. The work was often helping people to understand how the industry behaves. I used to teach a class at Princeton on how the industry works, and at HR Tech every year, I ran an introductory orientation for people to figure out how to make sense out of HR Tech by telling them about the industry. In this iteration of the HR Examiner, my wife, Heather Bussing, is going to be a full-up partner in this crime. And Heather is an amazing employment lawyer. She's way nicer than I am too, which is awesome because
she's nicer than almost anybody I know. So
she's pretty lovely.
Yeah, and she's so smart. One of the things she's doing these days is helping high-placed executives in HR Tech negotiate their exits. So that's going to end up being part of HR Examiner. And so I think the real answer is I don't know what HR Examiner is going to be, and I'm kind of excited to find out. I think, Meg, you'll remember we had a conversation when you decided to go off from SAP, and I said, don't figure out what you want yet. Let it go, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to take my own advice and see what happens. The revitalized HR Examiner website is on Substack, and we already have 3,500 subscribers. There's an audience for both Heather and I that are people who want to hear practical answers to complicated problems that are not gussied up just because you're writing a check. And so it'd be fun.
Practical answers, and I would say also human-centric values. Those are parts of your collective brand. That's the reason you have a great followership.
And I would add provocative positions with deep thought and research too. I'd love to just hear a little bit about some of your latest pieces and thinking. One is that AI is only 80% usable. Another is the anthropomorphism issues around AI, and another is the emerging importance of one-on-one personalization that AI brings versus many-to-many. So those are three pieces that you've recently brought forward that I think are very provocative, very thought-provoking, but you back them up with really great research and really great deep thinking. Which of those would you like to talk about?
I have been studying and thinking about AI in one form or another for as long as I can remember. My first real subject that became dear to my heart is systems thinking and cybernetics, which are the two initial pillars of AI as it was developed. So I worked in this big radar company, and radar happened in Boston because the computers were free. They did ballistic tables all the way through the war. And all of a sudden, there's all this computing power available. And guys like Claude Shannon and Norbert Wiener started trying to figure out how to build a brain. 1948, 1949. And their work permeates all of AI from here on out. And what's happened in AI is over that time, some ideas won out and some ideas didn't win out. It was an evolutionary thing. And some of the ideas that didn't win out are necessary to get us to the next level. The thing about large language models is that they really are never going to get to be precise.
Right.
And most of the interesting work in AI right now is about how to overcome the fact that those models will never be precise. And what it means is the LLM gets shunted into places where it won't do damage. Those places are getting smaller and smaller. Now, if you're an LLM company, this is the best marketing I've ever heard. Here's the marketing pitch. If you don't learn about AI, you're going to be out of work for the rest of your life. Give me $20. It's awesome, right? That is, Silicon Valley thrives on FUD. And this is like the best, simplest FUD that I have ever seen. It's wrong a lot. There are just not that many HR questions that have room for probabilistic answers. How much is my paycheck going to be this week? Well, probably it's going to be about $20. How much vacation time do I have left? Well, I think it might be about 3 weeks. You know, probabilistic answers in HR are hard. So how do you do really good coaching? I would let a large language model handle that problem because God knows what it would say. Right. And so that's the beginning of my critique. Once you start giving me your $20, then we're going to make this thing your friend.
Yeah, exactly. Tell you how smart you are.
because they don't just want $20 a month; they want your attention so they can sell you advertising.
Right.
It is not a very complicated business plan. It's expensive, but it's a very simple business plan. And so when you engage with the tools as if they were people, you teach them how to treat you so you'll stay sticky. And that's the problem. So anthropomorphism is what I do with Carlos, my dog. Carlos is nearly a human being.
I'm a big fan of Carlos.
And so the degree to which I treat him like he's a human is anthropomorphism. And we do that all over the place as human beings. We like to treat other creatures as if they're human. But they're not. And as comfortable as it is, and as wonderful as it is for me to love Carlos in all of his splendor, he's not a people. He's just not a people. He thrives on being treated like one, but he's not. He's not. And there are some things, like when he gives me that look that goes, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Could you please talk to me my way? That's his message for me to stop treating him like a person. But that kind of thing where treating something as if it's something that it's not has a lot of risk in it, particularly when the company that's asking you to do that or encouraging you to do that is going to make money because you do.
That's right.
So that's the anthropomorphism piece. Then there's there's a guy named Gary Marcus who is.
You were saying some things that were reminding me of Gary Marcus, actually.
Yeah, he is generally right about the limits of large language models and what happens. I listened to this incredible interview with Sam Altman and Satya Nadella, where they talked about what their energy requirements actually are. Mm. They need to put a gigawatt of new capacity online every week for the next 20 years. Now, a gigawatt, that sounds so abstract, but a gigawatt is a power plant. And to put up a power plant, you got 10 years of regulation and site surveys, and then another 5 years of eminent domain so you can put all of the lines in the right place. And that doesn't happen one a week. There's no way that that'll ever happen one a week. And so they're owning in public that they're running out of power. And I was telling Heather the other day that I find it remarkable that if you need power today, you can't build a nuke because it's got all of the regulatory time associated with it. So what are you going to do? You're going to put more coal in the power plants that use coal. After 30 years of trying to stop that stuff, we're going to run those coal plants at capacity to satisfy the needs of the AI companies. And I don't think we have that much time on the planet to go back and start puffing smoke into the air in that way. And so I think it's super important to be conscious of the sustainability consequences of AI, even if it seems very, very abstract, because once you start saying it's okay to back off of the environmental safeguards we have in place, you start playing with fire.
And then, of course, when you layer over the fact that if you do any reading at all, you find that these data centers that are being built and the power behind them that is being built is all being done with debt in SPVs and sort of off-balance sheet instruments. And so you start to think, okay, we're doing a massive expansion, and that expansion is being done with financial instruments that are very difficult to understand. So this is where I think we come to a world where we either have that, where we've sort of financial engineered a bubble in a way that becomes very difficult to sustain economically, and or we build with an assumption of access to AI that starts to get rationed, or have the pricing have to change dramatically as part of the way that you would potentially ration use if you end up with these choke points.
The cost of a token is always going to be driving down to the cost of electricity. The overall cost to operate a model is going to be higher than anybody wants, which means the engineers are going to get better and better and better and better at using tools smartly to reduce their resource consumption. What we're doing right now is taking the old models and automating them. We don't know how to price value. We don't know how to describe what value is. We don't know how to deal with the fact that value is context specific. Paying for usage means that the entire system conspires to not have you iterate.
You said that you can see 5 years out. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to hold you to that.
Okay.
What's happening in 5 years? What should we prepare for?
One of the things that's happening is people are starting to see the damage that having siloed work does. I have heard recently more people talking about improving the relationship between the CFO and the HR department than I've ever heard before. This is 80% of the balance sheet. you know, why aren't they eyeballing the human resources cost? And what you find when you go to eyeball the human resources cost is that the silos have prevented us from being budget savvy. Yep. So every other part of the organization has rigorous budget discipline. And HR is an ocean of exceptions to budget discipline. People who are closer to the problem are going to have a better chance at solving it. Like, you know, this is blasphemy. This will cause me hate mail. But what the hell do you need recruiters for in the first place? This is a job of the first level supervisor. What could be more important and more strategic than doing recruiting well? There's no accountability for results built into it. The accountability for results is always dumped off on somebody else's desk. And that's not how you run a business. It's how you run a business when people are very busy and you need to centralize functions that look administrative, but the recruiting function is anything but administrative. This is the single biggest investment that a company makes. And And it needs to be put in the hands of the people who are actually responsible for the outcomes from that investment. I've never seen a learning and development function that wouldn't be better if somebody who actually knew what they were talking about was running it. I think the cracks in what HR is are going to start to get very, very interesting.
Yeah, I think as businesses need more support for figuring out how to adapt to what is needed in the future, I think it becomes more clear that you're either part of helping to solve that problem, or you're going to be seen as somebody detracting from solving that problem. You can't be strategic in this moment and not speak the language of business. You can't be strategic in this moment and not really get deeply, roll your sleeves up, connected to where is the strategy requiring us to adapt, and what do we need to do to help our people adapt. If you're not solving that problem, I'm really not sure what the sustainability of any function is if it can't show that it's solving those problems for business today.
Yeah, I think one of the great things I got out of my time in Salary.com was a better understanding of what strategy actually means. Strategy, for all practical purposes, is how do you align what you're doing with the goals of the company? It's not any more complicated than that. And if you're aligning with the goals of the company, thumbs up. And if you're not aligning with the goals of the company, watch out. I don't think when people in HR talk about wanting to be more strategic, I don't think that's what they mean.
I just do wonder how we got so wrapped up with moving the needle from, hey, we care about people and we care about engaged employees, and making that be the end game, versus we care about people because they are critical to delivering the goals of the business.
Right.
Somehow we just dropped the most important bit. And ironically, we're not able to care about the people, because if we don't help them be materially important to the business, then, they're not going to be successful.
Yep. And the current design limits our ability to be aligned with the goals of the business. I do want to tell you that the one paper that I wrote in college that I was actually proud of was a look at the cotton mills in England in the 1820s.
Yeah.
And if you go into the HR Examiner today, there's an article in the HR Examiner about this idea that there isn't going to be work because of technology. And the first observable version of that was in the cotton mills in 1820, but it has come along with every new movement in technology. The threat, I mean, it's how I became a great engineer, is everybody was so scared of what computers would do that as long as you didn't let scared get in the way, there was a lot of room to move. But no jobs went away.
All right. Well, on that note.
So thank you. This was a delightful romp. I had the best time. You guys are so wonderful. Thank you.
We always learn a lot from you, John. Absolutely. And we are looking forward to getting our reading of the HR Examiner and really watching that entire project thrive under your leadership again.
I get to work with my best friend.
That is part of it.
We appreciate that. We appreciate that.
Send our love to Heather and to Carlos.
Ready for Leadership Corner, Meg?
Oh, you bet. Let's Leadership Corner.
I'm caught between senior leaders with competing priorities. How do I manage up effectively when executing one leader's agenda directly conflicts with another's?
Ooh, this is when the rubber meets the road, right? Yeah, this is.
Speaking of knives and
yes,
getting burned in the kitchen,
we seem to be on a theme, Amy. I'm not sure if your call to the audience has given us momentum in a certain direction, or if this is just where things are. But yes, this is tough. This is definitely a level cutter. So There is no easy answer, of course, but I think the way that I would start approaching this problem is to remember your first allegiance has to be to your organization and your direct boss. This is difficult because that can burn you, but I think it is the highest integrity way that you can approach the problem. So the first thing is keep that in mind, that your job is to make your boss look good. Your job is to execute the commitments that you've made to your boss and with your boss for how your department is going to deliver. The nuance really comes from if there is a way to find middle ground, you are going to do yourself a lot of favors to do that. If there is no way to define middle ground, having an opportunity to speak with integrity about what you are and are not going to do is going to matter a lot. So making sure that you're transparent about the fact that, like, hey, these are the two things that we hope to be doing. I'm not going to be able to be doing this one because I have made a commitment that I'm working on this one. Hopefully, by being able to step up with that transparency, you give some space for maybe the dysfunctional party leaders to have to talk about the things going on in the open, because oftentimes these are more beneath the surface kinds of things, and that's where it gets really difficult. So trying to keep yourself out of losing integrity, trying to keep yourself in a position of being clear and direct about what you are going to be able to do and what you're not going to be able to do, not to pick at scabs, but to at least make sure that you are both working with your own integrity and being clear about what is possible with your time and your energy, I think is probably the best thing you can do to help yourself feel good about what you are going to be able to do and what you're not going to be able to do. And then the last thing I would say is that the most important thing is to not let yourself pretend that you can do some of each, because if these two things are actually working against each other, the last thing you want to be doing is working against your own progress, because that is going to put you in a situation where it shows you're not able to get anything done. So that's why it becomes important to choose and then to provide transparency so that you can at least manage to get something done, versus putting yourself in a position where you're waiting for this to settle and you end up getting nothing done. That's probably the worst of all choices. So I'd stay away from that one.
Oh, that was a bundle of goodness there, Meg. Here she says, like, oh, I have nothing to say with this question, and then she just delivers all these drops of wisdom. So yeah, when I read the question, I was thinking of the two leaders as being kind of equivalent in my sphere, and so you made a really good point, Meg, that in all likelihood one of them is in my direct line of report, and the other is a very influential and very important person, but not necessarily in my direct line of report. So it does create a bit of an imbalance there that you have to be aware of. So I really like that. So when I was kind of thinking of them as being equivalent, the best thing, of course, would be to get them aligned, to get them on the same page. One of the things Meg said was around like being really super transparent about what everybody's trying to accomplish, what you're going to do, what you're not going to do, and just laying that all out on the table. Our tendency is to not do that, is to like hide and like pretend that it's all going to be okay. It kind of takes a lot of courage to be that transparent, but in fact, if you like adjust your mindset, this is actually making my life easier. And the other thing that I think you can do without getting into the full level of alignment is to really truly understand everyone's motivations, right? Like, why is this person really pushing for this priority? Why is this other person really pushing for the opposite? Like what is behind it? And because understanding the motivations, you can kind of understand a little bit more of like, well, what's the downside of going against that? And what's the downside for them? Like what sort of position of vulnerability are you putting that senior leader into by not following their priorities, right? And adding like a little bit of an empathy layer to all of it can help you perhaps with the big picture too. And then the last thing is that ultimately you're going to disappoint people. And we've talked about this before, and that's just the nature of executive leadership. And you have to be okay with, the horse you pick, the path you go, and, you might lose your job. It's
following our advice.
It's just the way it works, and you have to be okay with that. But just, understand the motivations, lay it all out, and do the right thing.
And I think that the key about the fact that you might lose your job is even more reason for speaking and acting with integrity, and making sure within the constraints that you were given, you got the most done that was possible, versus just allowing yourself to get frozen, because it's that getting frozen that then if the worst case happens and you are out looking for a job, you don't have the achievements to point to say, hey, these are the great accomplishments I managed to do in my time there. So don't let yourself become the victim of what is a problem you're not creating in the first place. Well, Amy, what a great show. Again, it never disappoints when talking to our friend John. So I don't know about you, but I have a lot to think about. And with that, everyone, let's invent the future together. I believe in us.
Let's make every day count.